But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I'm your host, Alison and with me today is Brian Martinez for this installment of HBR Debate, How Crowder's Arguments Don't Cut It with Feminism. And before we freak everyone out, you go on HBR Debate when we think that your arguments aren't totally full of suck. So rant and ragening are for those individuals who make arguments that are absolutely terrible. And you should feel how terrible they are on a genetic level, on the level of that sort of sinuous material between your muscles and your bones. That's where you should feel how bad their arguments are. If they're that bad, they go on rage or rant. Ragening or rant zerker. But if they do have some merit and we agree with the person that is having the argument, then they go on this show. So debate is an upgrade.
Yeah, or if they're a person that, you know, we do have respect for, or we like overall what they're doing, but maybe they don't quite, you know, maybe there's some stuff that they could improve on. It's sort of like a critique. Maybe we could call it HBR critique, so that there's no mistakes. I don't know. That just sort of dropped. Think of it as a critique, not outright. You know, they're not on the same level of the people who are on the rant circuit, which are just making terrible arguments, or they're arguing in bad faith, or they just hate men, just hate us.
So with that out of the way, we're not doing this necessarily because we dislike Crowder, or we think that he makes shitty arguments overall, or that we even disagree with him overall. We are critiquing aspects of the things he's said and the responses he's given to this individual. So bear that in mind before the gates of butthurt and the salt open up and flow all over us. Okay.
Yep. Okay, so I have some time codes here, so we're not going to watch the whole thing because it's like 56 minutes, and that's ridiculous. But I do have a lot of time codes because there's a lot of little things that maybe we could at least just listen to. We don't necessarily have to respond to. I am working a filter over the video so that we don't get the algorithm doesn't come after us. By the way, in the last video, did we have any copyright issues or anything, Alison? The last debate?
No, I don't believe we did.
So the algorithm, this thing's working. This is good. This should let us go over. Yeah, this should let us go over. And I don't think Steven Crowder's the type that would come after us for that. I seriously doubt that he would do that. So a little bit of context. 2 days ago, Steven Crowder invited this woman, Maria Del Russo, onto his show to talk to her about male privilege. And it turned out, it sort of turns into a conversation about feminism. The reason was because a few days prior, and I have to give this context because I don't want to play the whole thing. A few days prior to this video, maybe a week before, he put up a video from his series Change My Mind. For those of you who don't know, Change My Mind is a series. There's something like, actually something that I've talked with Alison about doing myself before Crowder started doing it. But basically he sets up a table, a microphone, and some cameras in a public place. Usually it's a campus. And he says, he goes in with a contrarian viewpoint to what he believes is a common belief in college campuses. So for example, he might have a table set up that says, I'm pro-life, change my mind, or I'm pro-Second Amendment, change my mind. And then he invites anyone who's on campus that feels like coming to him to essentially discuss the topic and try to change his mind, or at the very least have a conversation, try to find some common ground on his topic. So he did one on male privilege, and the video is pretty popular. He ends up talking with a very hostile student about male privilege, and he tries to, the student tries to debunk the idea that Crowder believes, I believe, that male privilege is not a thing, or it doesn't exist, at least not in the feminist definition. And Maria Del Russo was responding to it, essentially claiming that by the way that Crowder framed his discussion on the campus, he was proving the existence of male privilege. So this is how they ended up doing this conversation. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for that context.
Right, you're welcome. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to 1 minute 47 seconds in, where they start talking about it.
We don't need to get into this information, but you tweeted me the fact that you expect people to walk up to you and hand you an explanation because you asked for it instead of going online and researching it yourself is a pretty perfect example of male privilege. There are a couple of tweets, but let's start with that. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the premise or understand it, but
sure.
Let me hear.
What?
I just the way she's moving her head is bugging the hell out of me. I know this is a really superficial observation, but seriously, you're cocking your head like a 14-year-old valley girl.
Oh, well, if you're going to have issues with her body language, then this is going to be a really long stream, because
I tell you, the reason why I have so much issues is that this, like, people telegraph so much with their body language and their expressions.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like grating on my nerves.
It's almost like most of the communication, especially on her end. I mean, Crowder has some visual tells too, but his stuff is more about bewilderment at what she's saying, which is actually quite hilarious. There are parts where his eyes really widen at the shit that she says, but yeah, she communicates a lot with her movements. So.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to point it all out.
Yeah.
And bear with me, guys. There is a huge amount of human communication that goes on non-verbally. Right now, she's setting it up like almost like she's a child, and that does really bother me. Mm-hmm. It's an aspect of female privilege, actually, that they can adopt the mannerisms of the vulnerable children, and nobody calls them out on it, even when they're fully adult, which is unfortunate because fully adult human beings shouldn't be able to appropriate the vulnerability of children. But let's, unless I'm wrong, she is of an age of majority, right?
She is. What do you mean, like young?
Is she like over 18?
Oh yeah, she's definitely over 18. She has a blue check mark on her Twitter. I think she's a journalist or something. So
okay, so she's over 18 and she's appearing in this manner, and it's, just grating. Okay, let's continue.
All right.
But before we jump into all of this, I'm hoping that we can kind of start it out just as kind of like to frame off our discussion, to kind of define what privilege is, because I think that that's where a lot of this tension comes from, right? So there are two definitions that I want to share with you. So the first one is from like good old Webster's dictionary, and privilege as defined by that is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available to only a particular group or person.
Right.
If you talk about privilege in sociology, that examines the social, economic, and political advantages, given to a group on the basis of sex, race, finances, all that type of thing.
Okay, pause
right?
really quickly, just so I can make sure that I'm
Sure.
understanding. And so we're talking about systemic privilege, systemic discrimination versus sociological, cultural. And what you were tweeting me were examples, I guess you would probably argue, sociological examples of male privilege.
Well, they're societal examples of male privilege, because sociology is kind of the study of how privilege influences these different systems. So society is a system, as is economics is a system, as is politics is a system. So the examples that I were sending you were examples of social privileges that men have.
Okay.
But when we talk about privilege...
So what she was sending him was saying that him standing at a table and asking people to answer his question was an aspect of male privilege.
Yep.
Instead of doing the research on the internet. Well, so women don't have the ability to get a table, go into public, put the table down and set up a bunch of questions. Because I've seen women do that.
You have?
I've seen them do it. Yes, I have.
Where did you see that happen? The Middle East? The future? Do you have that Gamergate time machine? Is that how you did it?
I've seen that happen. I really have seen women with a table in public. Sometimes they were handing out pamphlets. Sometimes they were asking pointed questions. So I'm not sure how this is a male privilege. Like, I think there's a presumption here that she's relying on that's completely unexamined. And I think we need to examine that presumption. And what that presumption is it seems like an almost unconscious presumption that women can't do something. It's like, it's just a given. Yep. It's just something you can just rely on. You don't have to prove it. I mean, this is really painfully obvious that this is not something women can't do. That they can't set up a table and ask questions of passersby. In fact, I think I've seen women with microphones do that quite a bit. And they have a camera and they have a microphone and they ask people questions in public.
I've seen women organize other people. I mean, have you heard of By Any Means Necessary or Antifa? those are often organized by women in public. Now that you mention it, I'm starting to see some examples.
They're coming up. They're sort of bubbling up from your subconscious because you're just digesting
women
it.
Outside, I don't know, like, who let them out is the first thing I think of. Are they chipped so we can find them in case they get lost?
But this entire reasoning by her, which is what makes it so hilarious that she declares herself an agent of women's empowerment, rests on the idea that just the automatic presumption that women are barred from doing something. Just the automatic presumption of that women are incapable because they're barred, because they're victims. And it's not because of the weak gender, it's because they've been put into a position where they're weaker. Even though if they weren't weaker, they wouldn't have been put in that position. But yeah, never mind. It's just the automatic presumption of female victimhood. Completely unquestioned by her.
Yeah.
And that's what it's based on. And we need to unpack this and point this out. Lady, if you think that women don't have an ability that they actually have, it's because you think women are inferior.
So just making a statement here, this video that we're responding to basically is an HBR debate and a rant circle rolled up into one, because I would not think that responding to Maria Del Russo would be worthy of an HBR debate, because she is going to be extremely frustrating to listen to. So I'm just letting you know. So
it's Crowder that puts it in this category.
He does. It's because Steven Crowder's on here, and I personally like Steven Crowder. I like the way he does his show. I think it's very professional, and I see the way he puts it together as the gold standard for me. Not necessarily his opinions, just the way that the show is done. So, but yeah, Maria Del Russo is just someone he had a fight with on Twitter, and he said, you know what, I'll bring you on the show and we'll talk. So I don't think he was looking for the best candidate to represent feminism. We know that he's had Naomi Wolf on. It actually wasn't much better, but this is who we have. So, and the vocal fry is going to be extremely painful too on her part. All right, so let us continue. This is What is Privilege? She just defined it. So now we're going to go to Crowder's response, which I liked.
The change my mind thing.
Yeah.
It's a segment we've been doing for a while. And I know you mentioned that you got some threats from people and some terrible comments, which, listen, I mean, I won't apologize for them because I didn't make them, but I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
Thank you.
I just want to say, I like that he says, I won't apologize for them because I didn't make them. Those threats that she claims that she got. But I'm sorry that you had to deal with that. I think that's when this sort of stuff happens, where you're a public figure and you're talking with someone and that person claims that they get lots of threats from your followers, you are not responsible for your followers. And I think that sometimes people apologize for that when I don't believe they should, because it's got nothing to do with them. So
I would take a harder line than that. I would say, okay, well, if you prove that this wasn't a tit for tat, this wasn't mutual combat, this wasn't a situation where your followers were saying equally nasty things. I mean, I wouldn't even apologize for it. I would just be like, but maybe that's just me.
No, I'm with you. I would more like the fact that he does kind of smooth things over with her a bit. I think he's trying to be as good faith, like he's trying to give as much good faith to her as possible, maybe because it would make him look better. But personally, I wouldn't even acknowledge that someone got threats, and the claim would be that it came from me, because I'm of the belief that you'd have to prove that it's a threat, which most of the time on the internet is not credible. And I also would have to ask, why are you telling me this? What does this have to do with me at all? Because this stuff happens over anything on the internet. People get death threats because they bought an Xbox over a PlayStation. So that's got that. Yeah. That doesn't mean Sony has to make a statement. I mean, you know, so it's ridiculous. Okay. So anyway, moving on. This is not really the reason, the point of this clip. I just wanted to point that out. So Crowder's talking about how she got threats, and he's like, sorry that happened to you, but I'm not apologizing for it.
That's never my intention ever. And I know you asked me, you know, as a male, if I'd gotten similar threats from followers. If I'd been asked that I would be raped for expressing it. I'm sure now that you've done a little more research on who I am, that you're probably aware this is not a privilege I enjoy.
So this is something I liked, because Crowder lets her know that he gets a lot of threats, and he doesn't actually have the privilege of not being threatened online. And I like this because he shows that, you know, just because I'm a man doesn't mean that I'm safe from this stuff. And he goes into this a little bit later.
Well, actually, technically, because he's a man, he's less safe.
Yeah.
I mean, he may not get the threats to rape him, although I'm sure he probably does. But he's much more likely to get the threats of violence.
He has gotten rape threats, too.
Or the threats like, I would not even rape you. Which, I don't know how that's a threat, but there you go.
Yeah.
So, that was black humor, but it's true. Some people have tried to pass off, I would not even rape you, as a rape threat. No, my friend, it's not a rape threat. It's actually an insult. It's a rude one. I guess. I mean, technically, that's sort of the way you want to be baseline with everyone, right? I would not even rape you. Okay, that seems like a good baseline for
let's people. Start there. Can we agree that this is something neither of us want?
Yeah, but apparently it's insulting somehow to people who seem to want to be rapeable.
Yeah, because when you say I wouldn't even rape you, what you're really saying is I want to rape you. I shit you not, this is something that people have said. So
okay,
because they can read minds. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, yes, and 100%. I get all of that now, but the reason why I wanted to define privilege to you is that a lot of people consider privilege, when we talk about male privilege, they think of it more as like an adjective, when in reality it's actually a noun. So it's something like, privilege isn't something that you necessarily, or men in general, are necessarily, you know,
exercising over someone else.
Exactly. I know that one of the jokes you like to make is there's no secret patriarchy meeting coming together and being like, here's how we're going to oppress women. Like, sure, men's rights groups exist in this country and they may feel that way, but on the whole, this is not what this is, right?
Wow.
What? Now, Crowder doesn't respond to that. I think he just lets that go, which, I mean, he brings up MRAs later in the video, like far later, briefly too. And I think that was the bit that when he brings it up later, that was why I tweeted at him, because we can get into that when the time comes. But yeah, so according to Maria Del Russo, men's rights groups are the ones getting together having patriarchy meetings. I don't get invited to these things, and I'd like to, because I hear that they have great brandy and cigars. So,
well, what's really interesting is that you would assume, excuse me, in a patriarchy, they would be getting together to decide on how women's identities could best be structured to serve men. But Maria Del Russo, I'd imagine, has participated in those kinds of meetings, except in the reverse. meetings about toxic masculinity, about male privilege, and male entitlement, and what men should be allowed to do and say and how they should behave to best serve the interests of women. So what's really interesting is that she's proposing men are doing the things that she actually does and are actually paid for by a lot of government and corporate bodies and non-government organizations, NGOs and nonprofits. So I would like to point out that what she's saying men are doing...
MRAs, you mean?
MRAs. Right? What she's saying men's rights activists are doing is actually something that the group that she belongs to, feminists, actually are doing, except for men. Mm-hmm. Because it's an incredible amount of entitlement and privilege to believe that you can decide on another person's gender identity and how that gender identity should be structured in order to benefit your own group. In fact, that's the ultimate privilege, because the most essential, fundamental aspect of yourself, in many ways, is your gender identity and the belief that you bring something positive to the world through that gender identity that's particular to your gender. And if you control that, then man-spreading, mansplaining, what are the man-breathing, all the portmanteaus that involve man in some negative thing or just neutral thing, but once you put man on it, it becomes negative.
Yeah.
They're affording for themselves the right to judge men's identities. This would be the most, if there ever was a patriarchal meeting, this would be the first item on the agenda, talking about how we can structure women's identities in such a way that they serve men. And yet a lot of the feminist discussion is on exactly that, except reversed. How we can structure men's identities, how we can shame men's behavior, how we can take even innocuous behaviors like man-spreading and turn them into something that is worthy of being shamed by women in order to control men's behavior and make them feel like they're in constant process of having to prove themselves to us. That's the ultimate entitlement. The idea that one gender can define the other gender's identity, can define their expression as good or bad. That is the ultimate privilege. There is no greater privilege in history than that. And you'll see that throughout all of history, the people who were able to define another group's identity had almost ultimate control over them. The Ottoman Turks over the Janissaries, they were the kidnapped sons of Christian slaves who they brainwashed into Islam. It's not anti-Islamic, it's just historical fact. And then forever after, the Janissaries served the Ottoman Turks as their military, their political apparatus, their essentially their white-collar workers, all their trained, skilled tradesmen. They essentially ran the empire for the Ottoman Turks. And it was because the Ottoman Turks owned their identity through this process of brainwashing. And this is how you can have societies that are like 50% slaves, because the slave owners own the identity of the slaves. They determine, and the slaves comply to it. They determine what is good or bad behavior, and it's all based on service to the slave owners. Mm-hmm. And now I'm not saying that men are slaves necessarily. I'm just drawing the parallels and what an incredible privilege it is to be paid, for one gender to be paid money by the taxes of the other gender to sit around talking about how their gender identity could be structured for their service. And that's what we see happening on her side of the equation.
Yep.
I mean, the equivalent arguments on our side, and I don't think we've ever argued this, is how women can how women do not have the right to avoid consenting to sex with men or giving men their approval. That there's no way that you can disapprove of any man's behavior, and women should not be allowed to do certain things because it makes men uncomfortable. Not because it actually violates their person, like don't rape, don't abuse, don't hit, don't take a man's kids, shared custody should be a thing. Like, not that. I'm saying that woman shouldn't be able to sit a certain way on the subway because it offends men. A woman shouldn't be able to explain something if she knows the explanation because it offends men. A woman shouldn't be able to go off and have an all-girls out because that's exclusionary to men.
Yeah.
A woman shouldn't be, or women, girls shouldn't have Girl Scouts. They're all girl gatherings because that's exclusionary to boys. You know, that kind of thing. All right, can continue.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on. But before we do, guys, if you want to let me know what kind of stuff goes on at these patriarchy meetings that I miss out on, and what's your favorite thing about them. I heard somebody mention that they particularly enjoy the quiche, and I like quiche, so I hope I'm not missing out too much. All right, moving on.
Great.
Can you give me any examples, I guess, right now, 2018, of privileges, rights afforded systemically to males, not afforded to females?
Well, so this is again why I have a problem with the term privilege. I actually prefer the term advantage over privilege because I think that people get really caught up in the idea of privilege.
Okay, well, let's say advantage.
Interesting,
privilege, but you just
because privilege, the privilege dialogue has been shown to be complicit in war propaganda. So if you want to encourage genocidal violence against another group of people, you say that they have unwarranted or unearned privileges over your group. That's the best way to generate violence towards a group. So it's good that she's distancing herself from that narrative, but it's still used quite a bit. All right, continue.
Okay. Wait, there was some stuff that people said in the chat. Davey1602 said, mustache twirling in cigar-filled shadowy rooms. It's a laugh. I guess that's the patriarchy parties are like. Radspar Wolfsbane says, the coffee is surprisingly good. And somebody says, virgin woman sacrifices for patriarchy. That's funny. All right, moving on.
Mentioned men
Sure.
in power, right? So let's go with this.
Sure.
White men in power in this country for a long time, mostly men in power right now in 2018. There are a lot of female politicians, a lot of minorities, but let's go with that. What rights, since you brought up people in power, these people in power, right? They've created the structures that be. Right now, the structures that be exist in 2018. Any rights or advantages, privileges afforded to men, not officially afforded to women in 2018?
Well, what we are arguing here is that you guys are benefiting from a system where you guys were initially the only people in power, right? You guys have like a centuries-long head start on us. And because of that, these things don't change immediately. So sure, women are equal to men in that we can vote, in that, you know, women are just as able to ascend to CEO positions in all this type of thing. All of that is available to us. But since men have been in power for longer than women have had the opportunity to be in power, you guys have a little bit of a head start on us. And we all know that it's very difficult to change people's minds about something,
Sure,
right?
Okay. I want before.
All right, so what she's saying is that men benefit from a system, presumably patriarchy, a system in which they benefit each other. Okay, well, here's the thing. This is an assumption about statistical norms in society, and it could actually be proven. Also, I'm not really liking her smirk. She's got a tremendous smirk on her face. Okay, well, but that might just be like incidental.
No,
but,
she does have a, you know, the asymmetrical grin that feminists tend to have. She has that.
Duplicity, duper's delight.
Yeah, it's like this. I don't know. It's a smugness hidden behind insecurity.
Well, yeah, it's basically saying I'm deceiving you in such a way that I'm gaining power over you.
Yeah.
It's not a pleasant expression, but beyond that, there is a way that you could prove the essential premise that, or disprove it, the essential premise that patriarchy, our patriarchal system, is one that statistically benefits men. And the way that you do it is you just create an experiment and you'd run it on as many people as you could find, including people in higher, you know, men in high positions, women in high positions, you know, men and women, middle class and lower class, working poor, that kind of thing. Just run it as large a cross section of the society as you can. And the experiment would be very simple. You would ask people if they would be willing to take $20 from a man and give it to a woman, or the reverse. And you could, or a control condition where nothing is happening. So you would find out by running this experiment how many people in our society, and what is the statistical average that prefers to give money, take money away from women and give it to men? And what is the statistical average that prefers to take money away from women or men and give it to women? And then you would have some kind of answer to, do we exist in a society that prefers to benefit men over women? And like I said, you do it across the entire society. Lower income to all the way to upper income to CEOs, find out if there is an intention to want to benefit men over women. And I'm using money because it's a convenient way of saying benefit. But you could also use other things. Like, for example, you have an individual who has to punch someone. Who is that individual going to, who would you prefer him to punch or her to punch, a man or a woman? And you could do all kinds of other benefits. Would you prefer to save a man or a woman from violence? Would you prefer to save a man or a woman's life? And you can think of all kinds of different potential experiments to ferret out this bias she says that our society has to preferentially benefit men. As far as I know, this really, really, really simple experiment that would actually prove one of the major premises in patriarchy theory has never been done or even attempted. And what I think might be even close to that kind of an experimental paradigm has almost consistently found that we prefer to benefit women. So we can look at this structure that men have created, but you can't extrapolate from the fact that men have created this structure to say that the structure benefits men. You have to find out, what are the statistical probabilities? What do people want to do when offered an opportunity to benefit men or benefit women? Is there a social inclination to benefit men? The only research I've seen suggests the opposite. I'm just saying that, and it's a very, very easy way to either prove or disprove patriarchal theory. But I don't see feminism ever having done it. And the problem with that is, that means it is like every time a woman says patriarchy is a system in which men are charged to their own benefit, there's absolutely nothing behind that. It's a bald-faced assertion, and it's such a toxic bald-faced assertion. It's so associated in the past with things like wartime propaganda, with things like segregationist propaganda, with things like the propaganda against Jewish people during Weimar Germany. It's so associated. This entire dialogue of blame and privilege is so associated with disenfranchising and developing the desire to kill a group of people, that the fact that this woman can assert it without ever having been asked to prove it is despicable.
Yep. Agreed. All right, moving on.
Yeah, just if I'm quiet, just can.
Okay, I'll do that then.
Assume consent.
I will.
Consent.
Okay.
Positions of power. Another term that we get tripped up on a lot is the term patriarchy, right? Like, I know that the right hates that term, patriarchy, and I think that it's because a lot of times
It's just funny.
we don't. Yeah, it's funny, but if it's literally defined as a system or society. No, a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. You can agree that that is the way things have been.
How do you define power?
Political is how she defines it. Is usually how they do, but yeah.
Do you realize that throughout most of human history, political power wasn't actually the most important kinds of power? For the most part, politics was a judge coming to your town every 6 months to adjudicate over issues that you weren't willing to deal with on your own. Like, the political power was a token for most of human history. Real power was the power of necessity. And if you listen to how women described their lives prior to 2.5 centuries ago, they talked about the power of necessity. You know what the power of necessity is? It's the power over lighting, over heating, over clothing, over medicine, over edible food in winter. It's the power over shelter. These are the powers that women had. And incidentally, all of those powers, including child rearing, primary child rearing, all of those powers on a psychological sense are identical to the powers that alpha animals in a pack have over the subordinate animals in their pack. So all of those powers that women had in a psychological sense correspond identically to the powers that animals who are top dog in their packs would have had over the subordinates within their packs. So on a psychological level, these powers gave women the alpha position in their communities. And if you look at studies into peasant culture, this is very much so. Women were making the decisions. Women were making sure people survived. And men were given the political and the legal and in some cases the financial role because they had to do something. And it was a wink and a nod sort of, yeah, we're gonna pretend you're in charge, but that's not the real case. So and this is what happens in peasant societies. What happened throughout the last 2.5 millennia is that the power of necessity has gradually been removed from women, starting with grinding grain. 2,500 years ago, even 2,000 years ago, this started to happen in the Middle Ages. Women, the average woman, had a set of shoulders that were more powerful than an Olympic rower today. And that is because most women spent their entire day grinding grain with a rock over and over and over again. That was 2,000 years ago. Then you see the advent of the windmill, taking that necessity out. So women no longer have control over that necessity, but they retain control over chopping wood, hauling water, medicine, shelter, clothing, all kinds of other necessities, until we get to the Industrial Revolution, which starts to remove their control over those necessities. So throughout human history, women have had incredible power. They have had the same psychological power as the alphas in any kind of pack species. So when she says that women don't have power, she's full of shit. She actually doesn't even understand history. And yet she's making these sweeping statements about history in order to generate a victim narrative where she is a victim of history, she's a victim of men in history, or women like her were a victim of men in history, so that she can control his identity, so that she can justify bullying him morally.
Not only that, but she doesn't understand politics either, because being in a position of power politically does not mean that you, it doesn't actually mean anything, because you're in those positions not because you're getting power, but because you have to use the power that you have on behalf of other people, mostly women. And when I say that, I mean politicians, if they want to get elected, they have to appeal to the female voters, because the majority of voters are female, and they have to give them what they want. You're actually serving women at the end of the day. So even if you're serving
women.
Yeah. So
and
even
those women were serving their communities. Mm-hmm. Power usually comes with incredible responsibility. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, it's basically not about who has the power. It's about who the power is for, what you're supposed to use it towards. And
throughout most of human history, that power was used for the continuance and the well-being of your community.
Yes, which was essentially the women and children mostly, right?
Well, it would have been everyone, including the elder men. And to be honest, I think that gynocentrism in the past is overstated. I think our society is slumping into a bizarre form of gynocentrism that has never been seen before. Mm-hmm. In the past, women would be expected to do incredible amounts of labor in order to keep their community running. So it's a situation, and yes, they did have a preference in terms of being saved. However, it's sort of the same preference that we have when you see the infantry protecting logistics. You protect the people who feed you and make sure you can continue the fight. So it was more like that than it was necessarily like the bald-faced gynocentrism we see today.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I just want to say that for most of human history, and the individual is subordinate to the community, because the individual could not survive without the community. So people had power in order to benefit their communities. And women had power and men had power. And this individual is erasing the power of women in the past in order to create a victim narrative about herself in the present. And it's actually, again, it's despicable. Because not only is she setting the stage for her to have moral, essentially push Crowder around morally, which is what's really going on, and other men around morally. Not only is she setting the stage for that, she's erasing all of her female ancestors and their contribution to society to do so. That is an incredible act of disrespect.
All right, moving on.
For most of history, right? You and I can agree on that?
Well, no, not if we're talking about societally, no.
No, I'm talking politically, a system of society or government. So let's talk government.
Right.
Which men hold the power.
Right, so now we're going back to systemic. So systemically, yes, for example, women didn't have the right to vote until men passed laws that they could,
Sure.
yes. But
Yeah.
I want to make sure we compartmentalize those because we've now moved on to societally. Because even
Men passed those laws, but they didn't. The thing is that men passed. What the hell is she doing?
I don't know. Because she's worth it. Here, I'll just go here. Okay.
Yeah, please.
It's less
distracting as hell. Like she looks like a baby bird about to receive some regurgitation.
Oh.
Okay. All right. So it's completely distracting.
Men passed the laws.
Men passed laws to give women the vote. Well, a subset of men did, but at the same time, they weren't creating the same situation. When men gave the vote to lower class men who were not propertied, it was because those men served in wartime. When they give the vote to women, it's not the same. It didn't create equality because it created a class of people, an empowered class of people, a tremendously empowered relative. So you get two classes of people. One is tremendously empowered because they get the privileges of citizenship without the corresponding responsibilities. So they're tremendously empowered relative to the other class. The other class instantly becomes a secondary class because there's no other way to define it. So those men didn't create equality. They didn't even give women equality. They gave them political superiority. And this is just, it's fact. You cannot argue this. When you give one group privileges without responsibilities and the other group responsibilities and privileges, you are creating two classes of people. And the one without the responsibilities but with the privileges is the superior class of people. So when you look at that, these men in power gave women a superior position, superior to any position that they would give any minority men, any working class men, any men who don't have the property necessary to have the vote prior to this. They didn't just give women quote unquote equality, they gave them superiority. And the question is, if the government, if the men in the government were willing to give women a superior position over all men, including themselves, can you really argue that the government is an institution that privileges men over women? Like, on its most basic level, the first act in this enfranchisement, before it even enfranchised all the men who served and were responsible, they enfranchised women along with them. And that first act, before, as men received their enfranchisement, their entire enfranchisement, they enfranchised women and they gave them the superior position. So right there, you see an undeniable truth that government, regardless that it was composed mostly of men, maybe because it was composed mostly of men, preferred benefit women over men. Right there. And she has never done, or feminists have never done the research to contradict this evidence that a government comprised of men, prefers to benefit women over men.
Indeed. Oh, we got a super chat. Frenchinator2 gives us $5 and says, baby boys get part of their penis removed. Yes, men have it great. Yeah, there's that. Okay, moving on. Oh, right.
But
Sure.
yes, but I want to make sure we compartmentalize those because we've now moved on to societally. Because even if you go back then, you look at the temperance movement, you look at the influence that women had in politics, and you look at prohibition, they had every bit as much of influence and power. They just weren't necessarily in official positions of government. So now we're kind of blurring those systemic and societal.
But see, those lines, those are not hard defined lines because one hand washes the other when it comes to this type of thing. When it comes to privilege, it's all kind of interconnected because patriarchy is also defined
Yeah.
as a system of society in which the father or eldest male is head of the family, and you could trace descent through the male line, right? So it's all, whether it's society, whether it's government, men are in charge.
Okay,
So
blah 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 blah.
Oh, okay,
Well, you're not in charge, but
So this definition of patriarchy, the second definition, where it's just like, it's a familial system, I guess, where, the family line runs through the father. It's like the woman takes his name and then has his kids. I was always under the impression that that was simply the reward he got for being the sexually successful one. In that sense that it's a way of him getting to live forever in a way. It immortalizes him, right? Not really, but, through his kids, they take the name of the family. But at the end of the day, women decide who gets to do that, if she even decides to have kids at all. So I don't see how that's power just because a woman takes a man's name. But maybe I'm just blind to that.
yeah, I would agree. It's probably a reward for having successfully gotten to the point of reproducing.
Yeah.
But what I want to point out is I don't even want to engage with this nonsense that she's just spouted out. She hasn't said anything to what Crowder said. He's pointing out that women did have systemic power, and it's what we've been pointing out as well. Temperance movement is a perfect example of that. Women had political clout without the vote, without it. Whereas when you look at history, disenfranchised groups of men did not have political clout without the vote, but the women did, because it speaks to a type of power that women wield, again, in those peasant societies, a type of power to define what is productive in those societies, and also to define who belongs to them. It speaks to that kind of power. And she is not even engaging with it.
No.
What she's done is she's sleight of handing.
Yeah.
She's saying, she's trying to get away from, and this is something that I noticed with the argument between Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman. Crowder is framing it in this argument, very, very important. Crowder is framing this argument in terms of seeing women's power. Maria is trying to reframe it in terms of women's victimhood and weakness.
Yeah.
That's what she's doing here. She's trying to reframe it in terms of exclusion of women from certain social institutions, which doesn't actually contradict Crowder's point. But here's the problem. If Crowder continues and argues, instead of arguing, well, look, women had power, look at the temperance movement, they didn't even have the vote and they had power. Men in the same position who had no vote did not have this kind of power. If she doesn't reframe it back to a discussion on women's power, she has successfully sleight of handed him into a much worse arguing position. So let's see what happens.
All right, I got to go back then. I don't think he does, but let me go back to, it was 9:52. So hold on.
So today, again, because again, we're going into systems of power and men who were in power. Today, societally, privilege advantages. We moved on from rights. Societally, how do you make the argument? Like I said, this is a change my mind effectively right now. The idea that we're taught in schools by gender studies professors, by far left progressive feminists, this idea of privilege. It's the word they use. I know everyone has different words, but it's the word that's used when I was in college. When we had
Isn't it interesting that privilege has everybody? Is these people say that everyone has privilege but them? At least in the case of female gender studies. Of course, they'll talk about white privilege, but it's really white women's privilege is really the privilege of being complicit and with what the horrible things that white men do. So it's not really that white women are horrible. It's just that they've been browbeaten to facilitate the horribleness of their men, and they just don't hate their men enough. That's the real problem with white women. Okay, but regardless,
he doesn't. I don't believe he actually does do the thing that you're saying. So that's a missed opportunity there. Although there are other areas where Crowder does bring up places where men are vulnerable, and so yeah. Well, we can continue from there. And there are definitely MRA talking points that he likely got from either having Karen on, because he's had Karen on like at least 2 times that I know of, or maybe he's even watched some of Warren Farrell or Karen or even our content for all we know.
Ha ha ha. But I highly doubt it. But the thing is, I think it was at 10:59 where we'll determine if he responds to this conversation. Small p patriarchy is an undeniable observation. We tend to prefer to have men in positions of power. The unfortunate other aspect of that is when we put a group of people in positions of power, they lose social sympathy by virtue of being perceived as being powerful. So when we put a group of people in positions of power, they're less likely to receive consideration when they need to be helped. So there's a downside to small p patriarchy, and feminists have yet to prove that in our small p patriarchy, somehow the downside of being seen in charge doesn't apply to men. So let's continue.
Okay. Another super chat real quick before I forget. Fred Shinator 2 gives us $2 and says, "Feminist train, woo woo, train emoji." All right, moving on.
Well, certainly they do. Certainly, I agree. Of course. Listen, your past dictates a part of your present. But listen. Again, we're going back to people in positions of power. They made men eligible for the draft and not women, right? They made men have mandatory bucket duty and not women. They made men an actual whipping post if they abuse their wives and not women. So no one's perfect, but we've gotten better.
And if we talk about patriarchy, you will hear a lot of feminists say that these patriarchal systems are also negative for men as well. We're not just saying like we need to dismantle the patriarchy.
Okay, how is that possible? You're saying that patriarchy is a system that benefits men over women. And you're seeing counterpoints and you're saying, oh yeah, these data points disprove our theory, but our theory is still sound. No, it isn't. Your theory is not sound. If there are data points that disprove your theory, you've got to revisit it and either figure out how it works or change it entirely. Okay? And this is the thing. Feminism has never revisited its patriarchy conjecture. Every single data point that contradicts every single data point and scientific experiment that they've done trying to test the prediction. The thing is, with scientific theories, what's essential about them is that they be able to predict phenomenon. Every single feminist paper I have ever seen that has attempted to use patriarchy conjecture in a predictive way, the way a scientific theory is supposed to be used, has failed miserably. And yet all of these data points and all of these scientific failures, and they will not go back and look at the fundamental aspects of their patriarchy conjecture, no matter how much. And there's what's the scary thing, is men could have a wage gap against them and they would still say patriarchy hurts men too. Men could be the minority of people in power and they would say patriarchy hurts men too, because there is no evidence that you can present to them that will ever get them to actually look at patriarchy conjecture and reconsider changing the formula. This is a permanent assumption on their part that nothing will shake. And it hasn't been proven. That's what's astounding. They pulled patriarchy conjecture right out of the playbook of violent movements throughout history. Right out of there. All this talk of privilege. You see it with the Nazis against the Jews. All this talk about being uniquely rapey. You see it against the segregationists, against black men. And you see it consistently when we want to demonize a group of people. Exactly the same talking points as patriarchy conjecture. So they pulled it right out of that, and they have never been asked to prove it. And even when they've actually disproven it, they have never questioned their conjecture about reality. This is ugly at this point. It's not just stupid and silly and ha 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 funny. This is ugliness coming from the right hand of this video. It's ugliness.
Absolutely. What? You want me to read that? Schulthis Studios gives us $2 and says, patriarchy hurts animals, men, women, and amoebas. Patriarchy is terrible for amoebas. Terrible for them. Also, I wanted to say, I think that the key word here when it comes to what feminists believe patriarchy is, it comes down to power. Power is the thing that they are the most obsessed with. It is how they measure the worth of everything, and it has to be political power, which means force. Power at the end of a gun. Those are the things that they seem to be the most concerned with, which is why when they say patriarchy is a system that hurts men too, what they're saying is there are men, the powerful men are the enemy. They are the patriarchy. This caricature of a fat guy with a cigar that has money and power and kills people indiscriminately, a cartoon villain, essentially. Then there are their victims, and first come the other men, who are men that they want to help and they don't want angry at them, but they actually don't really care about because they're simultaneously guilty at the same time. And then come the women who are the actual people that they claim to care about, but they also don't care about. Oh, wait, I forgot. Conservative women or women that want to start families are somewhere in between regular men and feminist women.
Well, the problem is that if you're a woman who in any way wants the power of women respected throughout history, you're screwed with feminist women. Mm-hmm. If you're a woman who really, really on a fundamental level rejects being reduced down to a victim, you're going nowhere with feminism. In fact, they will actively persecute you. I've experienced that.
Yep.
So this is like feminism benefits a particular political group of people. And
feminists.
Yeah.
It's for feminists. Okay, so moving on.
Because it's bad for women. It's bad for men, too, for all of the reasons that you just agreed.
I got to jump ahead. I got to go to 12:36 for the next clip.
The norm. That is the norm. Someone once asked Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what would make you happy? Like, how many women on the Supreme Court would make you happy? And she said all of them, because there have been all men on the Supreme Court. So why shouldn't there be all women?
See, that's where we differ. And that's where I think where we can come to our disagreement, maybe later on we'll continue along this path, is the solution. I think that's a horrible answer. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine why I would think that's the worst answer possible.
Sure. I happen to agree with you. But the fact that all men is normal.
She's extremely frustrating because she agrees with everything he says, but then argues against the central principles. So just try. This is really annoying. I didn't, anyway, she's really annoying, but moving on.
And all female is abnormal is the crux.
No, but that's not why. That's not why I think it's bad. I think it's bad because I am all about, of course, we've supported on this program, equal opportunity. What Ginsburg is talking about there is equal outcome. I couldn't care less. It's not because there's normal or abnormal, whether it's Clarence Thomas or Ginsburg. I couldn't care less. I care about the most qualified person for the job. I care about the constitutional scholar who will protect our rights. I couldn't care less if they have a penis or a vagina. And I think that's a big
100%.
reason why young women, and particularly young men, the danger that we're seeing now, reject this idea of feminism, reject this idea of privilege and advantages, because they see a lot of disadvantages that men experience, not as a result of patriarchy, but as a result of feminism, because of that mindset that it's time to ensure equal outcomes. Saying all women on the Supreme Court, listen, if you're a man today, if you're a 22-year-old male, you go, hold on a second, everyone here has equal rights, and I don't want the Supreme Court to become an affirmative action land.
Okay. Actually, that's pretty good. That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's doing pretty good. What I'd personally, on a scientific level, I'd want her to, she hasn't proven that an all male Supreme Court actually disenfranchises women, because you have to find out if we have a social tendency towards privileging women or privileging men. Why not just do an anonymous survey of judges and find out if there is a bias towards giving men stuff versus women, and then you'll have your answer. If there's a bias towards giving women stuff because people in power want to help, in many cases want to help those groups that are perceived to be vulnerable. This is really common. It's very common desire. If men in power puts women in a position where they can receive the benefits of that power, and men want to give that power, the benefits of that power to them, then the essential part of the patriarchy, as she conjecturizes it to be, is false. And ultimately, I think it all comes down to this. Why are we having this argument? This individual should not have gotten this far with such a bald-faced, unsupported assertion like patriarchy conjecture, something that has never been proven. This has never been proven. She might as well be talking moonspeak, guys.
Yep. It's just something that a bunch of academics have decided is true, and they all agree with each other. But it's not proven at all.
It's not proven at all. And the most essential central part of patriarchy has never been proven. In fact, the reverse, it looks like the reverse when you look at women are wonderful effect, the fact that we prefer to see women as being wonderful beings, the fact that women have in-group bias, the same as white people and Christians and the wealthy, and men don't, like black people and non-Christians and the non-wealthy. All of these things point to the opposite of the parts of patriarchy conjecture that aren't just a flat observation of reality. Yes, we prefer to have men in positions of power. As a culture, we seem to, we not necessarily prefer, but that's just sort of how it happens, how it ends up. And I mean, I would argue is the reason why you see men at the top of institutions is the same reason why you see them at the bottom, because in our society, we expect men to serve institutions at the detriment of their own well-being, all the way from the bottom to the top. And the top is still serving the institution to the detriment of his own well-being. He still has to answer to the shareholders, which are in many cases majority female. He still has to answer to the customers, again, majority female. The two groups of people a CEO has to answer to are most likely majority female. And he knows if he displeases them, he's going to be evicted from his institution. So this is the fact that she hasn't, like feminism has never proven that patriarchy, men in power equals men benefited by other men, is a critical failure. And the fact that she's even able to rely on it to make an assertion is actually pretty terrible, because it's never been proven. And it needs to be. And the opposite is quite likely to be true. When men are in positions of power, they prefer to give the largesse and the benefits of those positions to women. And we see massive examples of this throughout history. Once again, women's franchise. When men in power gave women a superior position to all men. And they gave men not in power an inferior position to all women. Right there. Every single example of this shows that men in power prefer to give women the largesse of that power, prefer to give them the benefit of that power.
Yeah.
And she's not engaging with these arguments at all, and she never will, of course.
No, because that's a trap. I mean, in her mind, she thinks it is. It's a patriarchal tool. You don't want to do that. You have to smash the patriarchy. Okay, we got some super chats. Cyberzerk gives us 56 and says, "Year 2100. Men, why don't you protect us women from feminism?" That's when they have neo-feminism, which is the feminism to protect women from other feminisms. I could see that.
It's the feminism to protect women from the effects of feminism today.
Yeah. The feminism of tomorrow. And Zeranx gives us $10 and says, "I wanted to respond to this video in the comments. The reason we trace genealogy through the man is because X chromosomes is degraded in comparison to Y that remains mostly intact throughout the generations." Well, I mean, I guess
I'm not
so,
sure
but
about the
I don't
science
know
of
about that because, like, we were tracing people through familial lineage well before we knew what X and Y chromosomes were, right?
And I'm not so sure that the science about what he's saying about X and Y chromosomes is correct. But I assume that you have quite a few more time codes to get to, right?
I do. So
I don't know if we're going to be
Bring
able to
the
get to them
noise.
all.
yeah, no, I got some more. We can get to them. I think we can.
Bring the noise.
I may have to go to the.
Bring the ruckus.
We may have to take a bathroom break.
Okay, we could do that. So I'm at the next time code. I can also jump to some of the really juicy ones and skip the weaker ones too. So
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. What she's going to do throughout this entire thing is she's going to try to reframe everything in terms of women's victimhood. She's going to try to reframe it in terms of a completely unproven assertion, a conjecture about men's power that basically is on the same level of a conspiracy theory, like a really bad conspiracy theory. Not a conspiracy theory with evidence. It's a conspiracy theory that actually has not just no evidence, but reverse evidence. That's what patriarchy has. It's a conspiracy theory with significant evidence that it's not true. She's going to appeal to that, and we're going to go back and forth, and we're going to be like, well, you have no evidence for the thing you're asserting. In fact, you have negative evidence for the thing you're asserting, and yet you continue to assert it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go to the juicy bits, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so we'll jump to there right here. Let me just go. I think I'm a minute in. This is
because of females repeatedly violently assaulting me. I'm sure if you've seen previous videos. So, yeah. But how do you think it should be set up so that it would not mirror, quote unquote, sort of microcosm of a patriarchal system?
Okay, wait a second. So he sets up his.
No, I gotta go back a little bit. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Get your time codes right.
No, I jumped to the wrong moment in time, which is.
Well, I want to address this now. I know.
I know. I'll let you. Okay.
Okay.
And you would now acknowledge that your premise was incorrect.
Yes. Well, I mean, I still think that that setup is an imperfect setup. If you will take a little construction.
She's talking about his setup at the change my mind thing.
Okay, all right. Stop jumping around, Brian.
All right, no, I'm not. I jumped back. Let me get to. It's gonna play. You'll see.
Go ahead. How should it be set up? And also, a big reason, by the way, that it was set up that way is because of females repeatedly violently assulting me. I'm sure if you've seen previous videos. So, but how do you think it should be set up so that it
Okay,
would
pause
not mirror,
here. No. Actually, wait. I'm going to listen to what she has to say because I'm actually getting really pissed.
Okay.
Quote unquote, sort of microcosm of a patriarchal system.
The change my mind positioning is what really it's more of like, I have this opinion and it is your responsibility to change my mind, instead of being like, hey, let's enter into a discussion like this.
You almost said the word debate, admit it, and then you had to catch yourself. You said so let me explain to you why, and maybe this will be illuminating. The change my mind segments, by the way, are pretty popular. It's the complete opposite of cable news. That's the design behind this. So we just recently had one. I'm pro-gun.
Okay, all right,
change my mind.
Stop. How did she just blow over the fact that he had to set this up to avoid physical violence from women? How did she blow over the fact that that's an incredible level of entitlement? Mm-hmm. Someone goes into public, sets up a table. A man goes into public, sets up a table, puts up a sign, and you feel entitled to physically assault him based on his opinions and or what you perceive to be his opinions. She completely does not address this. This is like, it's irrelevant to her. Did any of these women get charged with assault?
I don't know what happened specifically, because this is something that happens to Crowder a lot. He actually goes and he has to go armed when he goes to college. He's never had to use it, but he's like, concerned with his safety, so they take a lot of precautions. And he doesn't just get threats from feminists, he also gets threats from Islamists. Surprisingly enough, those are the only groups that do that.
All right. Well, they feel empowered to do it, I assume. Okay, so here he is, and he has to protect himself. He doesn't say that he's been violently attacked by by Muslims at this point. He's
No.
saying
He says he's
that
been threatened by Muslims in the video.
Threatened, but he's been violently attacked by women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So why is it that she's not addressing the fact that those women seem to feel entitled to violently attack a man for his apparent opinions?
She doesn't. She actually thinks that the best thing to do in this situation is explain without addressing it directly. She's basically explaining why what he is doing is essentially inciting violence against him while giving that violence a pass, because she doesn't actually confront that fact.
That's unfucking believable. She's looking at him and she's saying that he should not have opinions that offend women, or he'll be subject to justifiable violence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm getting off.
Yeah.
Don't have opinions that offend women, or don't present them in a way that might be challenging or debate, or they're justified in engaging in violence. Does she address this at all? Am I because does she ever say, "Hey, oh shit,
no,
I'm really sorry. I wasn't one of those women who attacked you, but I'm sorry you had to deal with that"? Does she say that?
No, she does not. No, that never happens.
So it's like a non-issue to her.
Yeah.
It's a non-issue that this guy goes in public and gets attacked for his opinions. And it's entitlement for him to go into public. Well, okay. I've never seen a woman go into public with a sign and get physically attacked for her opinions. Unless it was a conservative being attacked by feminists.
Well, yeah, or I've seen people like get pepper sprayed. Women get pepper sprayed because they were wearing a MAGA hat by Antifa.
Oh, but, and they do get pepper sprayed by the police if they're Antifa as well.
Yeah, they sure do.
Okay, but
all right.
Presumably outside of a really heightened scenario where there's a whole bunch of protesters clashing and people and cars driving and people waving bats and police and all of that. Outside of that, let's just imagine a woman on a table with an opinion. How often does she get attacked by men for having an opinion? I mean, in the exact same scenario as Crowder. Does this happen?
Not really.
I'm throwing this out to the crowd. Can you find evidence of a woman on a table with an opinion? That's it. Just saying, change my mind. I'm pro-life. Change my mind. Well, maybe not that one, because that might actually get physically attacked. just that.
I'm anti-circumcision or something.
I'm anti-circumcision, okay? Just sitting there having an opinion, and not in a situation where there's any crowds or there's anything going on, like not on a heightened a situation of heightened conflict. In other words, it's just she's just there, she's just in public with her table, with her opinion. That's it. There's no protests. There's nothing going on. Find me evidence that women are. A woman in that scenario is as likely to be violently attacked for her opinion. Once again, no heightened danger, no crowds, no protesters, nothing crazy going on except for a woman with a table and opinion. You find me some evidence that that's the case, that there has been a woman in Crowder's position who has been physically attacked by men for it. Okay, let's go.
All right. Let me go to my... Well, I'll go ahead and continue this clip, I think.
And the reason for this is, and most of the time they're incredibly civil. Ironically enough, the only time we've ever had people violently assault or scream or have been feminists on campus. They haven't been the best ambassadors. So the purpose for this, and by the way, understand that my view is the unpopular view to hold on campus. I am going into a campus where the vast majority of people would agree with your presuppositions and not mine. And so I'm going into actually not only neutral territory, but adversarial territory, presenting a differing point of view and allowing anyone, male, female, black, white, take your pick. Your guess is as good as mine. Whatever gender walks along down the trail, anyone to have a conversation. The onus is on them to present to me why I'm wrong, because I am taking a more contrarian view than what's taught in schools. Because everything you've just said, I learned in women's studies in college.
So the reason why I took issue with it, because it was a male privilege thing, is because as a male, you were saying, I am male and I think that male privilege is a myth, change my mind. So you're asking
Okay, all right.
Female.
So as a male, you don't have a right to have an opinion on male privilege.
Yeah, no, you don't.
This is what this boils down to. I get to define your identity. I get to define what is right and wrong in your behavior. I get to define you morally. This is moral thuggery, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I get to do it based on my misreading of history and a conjecture that makes as much sense as saying the moon is made out of green cheese. We've actually proven that the moon, we're pretty sure that it's not made out of green cheese. There's evidence that it isn't. Evidence that it isn't. There's evidence that your concept of patriarchy is absolutely and utterly incorrect. And yet you feel entitled to posture over what a Crowder can do and judge him morally based on this. Based on something, and it should have had to be proven before you get the right to judge him morally. I mean, what kind of freaking kangaroo court is this? Feminists can make up a conjecture about how the world works, never have to prove it, actually disprove it multiple times, and have plenty of counter evidence. And they can use that conjecture to condemn men, and they just get a pass over and over and over again. And this is treated as something that is serious. I mean, this doesn't belong in a civilized society. It doesn't belong. This kind of libel, this kind of absolutely with no evidence, with significant counter evidence, this assertion that society, because men are in positions of power, they are using those positions of power to privilege other men. That's
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to argue this because it has no right to be asserted in the first place because it hasn't been proven. This is what really galls me, is this woman and all the women like her in feminism are asserting this conjecture prior to it ever having been proven, even in the presence of significant counter evidence. That, my friends, is female privilege.
The only kinds of people that would tell you that there is a group of people with a shared identity of some kind that have all the power and they are coveting that power and keeping it away from you specifically, and they're using it only to benefit themselves, are people that indeed, if they had power, would do that very thing. Feminists claim that the patriarchy takes women's power away and gives it only to men because it's run by men, because they believe that if they had power, that is exactly what they would do. They would take the power away from everyone else and give it to themselves.
Well, it's what these individuals are doing.
I mean, that's what if you see the world that way, that's how you're going to act on it, right?
Yeah.
So.
And this is a privilege. In fact, it's a privilege that ties into the fact that small p patriarchy, men are in positions of power. They like to see themselves as powerful. They see women as vulnerable. And she's essentially exploiting that. If we lived in a society where more women were in power, it might not hold that we would continue to see women as powerless. And she might not actually be able to exploit this kind of narrative to put herself in judgment over Crowder's identity. Like, that's what she's doing. She's creating this narrative of victimhood as a woman, and she's putting herself in judgment over Crowder's identity. And not just that. Listen to what she's actually saying. Crowder has the privileges of a man to question my assertion that he has privilege. Crowder has the privilege of a man to question the war propaganda that I am directing against him and his gender. That's his privilege. So she is actually trying to use the war propaganda she's directing at his gender as an excuse to completely and utterly silence any kind of objection to having war propaganda targeted at him. And this is the funny thing. People say that it's an extreme position. But when you look at feminist theory or feminist conjecture, patriarchy, it's like I said, you can take it right out of segregationist literature, right out of Nazi literature against the Jews, right out of any kind of literature in which you're trying to paint a group of people as subhuman and worthy of being killed. She is saying, my war propaganda, you questioning my war propaganda, is evidence that my war propaganda is absolutely right, and that I should have the absolute right to direct that cannon of hatred and potential violence right at your head. Unfucking believable. Sorry, this is getting into a little bit Rand Zerker territory.
Kind of. It's okay. All right. So this, I think this next bit is good.
Screeching banshees, not big fans of them. But the point is,
I think
you just said damned if you do, damned if you don't. I
gotta give you some context for that because I kind of like jumped ahead. So she makes the claim that if a woman goes, they're talking about the pay gap, right? And Crowder's explaining that, you know, there's lots of factors for it, one of which is women want to have babies. And she's making the claim that women, because women want to have babies, it becomes a problem for them because employers are wary about, you know, essentially hiring women, according to her, because so many of them tend to leave work either for a 9-month leave or altogether so they can go and mother children. And she thinks that they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. So if they basically choose to have babies, then they can't work or they're likely going to lose their job or something. You know, there's going to be some penalty for that. But if they choose to not have children and stay at the job, then they will be considered to be unwomanly, screaming banshees for whatever reason. But that's not important. We've heard that before, whatever. But Crowder addresses this damned if you do, damned if you don't argument that she's making. And he does a nice little flip on it.
Probably describe a lot of bosses who I had, including some at Fox News, as banshees, men or women, screeching banshees, not big fans of them. But the point is,
I think
you just said damned if you do, damned if you don't. I just heard that women had a choice. Guess what a man has? Damned if you do, and guess what? Do. Because we don't get to have babies. We don't get leave. There isn't maternity leave. And I know you can point to examples like Sweden and places where men do have paternity leave and they don't contribute anything other than occasionally a new form of birth control every century. But we're talking about here in the United States of America. I certainly would not consider that patriarchy.
You should have paternity leave. I think that you 100%, if you and your wife decide to have children.
I just want to, I long for a day, because this woman is quite attractive. I long for a day when those little microaggressions of contempt and just, you're a bug under my foot, man. You're just, you all your worth is how I can tell you what you should be. I'm going to tell you what your identity is. And I'm going to make you squirm if you don't agree with me. All of that. I wish those microaggressions one day would actually be how she's viewed and whether or not she's seen as attractive. Mm-hmm. I'm just putting it out there.
Okay, what number am I at? This is Men's Choice.
And he is doing a really good job.
Yeah, he is.
Should have paternity leave.
When you set this title, I was like, are we sure we can actually, because let's see, the title is the title of the stream.
It's how Crowder's arguments don't cut it with feminism.
Well, I guess there's a double meaning there. But the thing is, he's doing pretty well.
No, I'm not criticizing his arguments at all. See, so you guys understand where I'm coming from, or what we're coming from is, Crowder is using MRA arguments. If he was using your average TradCon arguments, he may have missed a lot of this stuff. He has... One of the things that's giving him the edge here is he is showing the ways in which men are disadvantaged. And you can't do that without using MRA arguments.
No, you can't. And he's been using MRA arguments. He's doing what Peterson is doing, or did with the Kathy Newman interview. I don't know where he's picked this up. Maybe he does watch our content, because I pointed this out very explicitly. Do not allow them to bait you into arguing women's victimhood. Always argue women's empowerment. Do not, and also, when applicable, reference your vulnerability. And this is something that Crowder has done multiple times now. He said, I've been physically attacked by women. And he didn't look very happy when he said it. So he's acknowledging the fact that it's not something, a laughing matter or something to laugh off. It's actually a genuine physical threat on his person. And he's actually giving her very little ground. I mean, this is bravo. You know, bravo. So you want to, when you're arguing with feminists, always keep the frame to women's empowerment. And where applicable and where you feel comfortable, pull in your vulnerability and make sure that you keep it present, because that vulnerability is what's keeping him saying, this is my identity, you don't have power over it. That's what it does. When he keeps that present, he's able to oppose her threat narrative of framing herself as the vulnerable one who gets to determine his identity. He's maintaining the frame. He's maintaining his identity, his control over his identity when he does that. Now, men are not very comfortable with talking about their vulnerabilities, but that is, he's not doing, like, you look at him. He's not passive. He's not weak when he talks about how he was physically attacked. He's doing so, and Jordan Peterson, when he owned his vulnerabilities in the conversation, he was doing so from a position of power and self-possession. That is what this does. When he's not gonna let her tell him, or maybe she will, and then she'll look like an asshat. But she didn't even acknowledge it. Like, it's just she just skated through. But it is an aspect of self-defense for Crowder to keep himself in that position and recognize that she doesn't have a monopoly over the vulnerability because she's a woman, and thus, by that route, gains the right to bully him morally, and decide upon his identity. So just you know, this is a perfect case study of what I was saying with the Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson interview.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
But as a side note, before I read the super chats, we're almost at the end here. Maria Del Russo is an attractive woman, but she is having a hard time in the dating world, according to her Twitter. I wonder why that's the case. So we have some super chats I want to get through. Zeranx gave us $5, and he is the guy who's mentioning the whole X chromosome, Y chromosome comment from before. He says, the source is from a Stanford College article I found. I will provide it. So yeah, go ahead and do that. Maybe put it in the comments section afterwards. Frenchinator2 gives us $5 and says, so the patriarchy is a good example that men are bad at making systems. Yes, we are terrible at patriarchy, but we're really, really committed to doing it. Cyberberserk gave us another 56. Boop, 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 boop. So patriarchy is an example that feminists are bad at making up facts. That's feminism is an example I think of that, maybe. I don't know. And then Ryan Durand gives us $5 and says, Super Chat! It's just the way he wrote it. I'm trying to figure out what he meant by that. Okay. Moving on. We'll jump ahead to the next bit, which is, I think it's like right here.
Hold on, let me center myself now. We talked about rape threats, right?
Okay, so yeah, this is a good one. So she's changing the subject because basically Crowder's like, look, you know, with the pay gap, you lost, let's move on. Essentially is what it is. So
a lot of rape threats.
Oh, the standard, the rape threat. Yeah.
Yeah, the standard rape threat.
Hold on, let me center myself now. We talked about rape threats, right? I got a lot of rape threats.
That's an odd sequence.
Let's look closely at what she's doing in her face-wise when she says, "Let me center myself."
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think that hold on, let me center myself now. We talked about rape threats, right? I got a lot of rape threats.
That's an odd sequence.
There's a little bit of a smile there, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird considering
That's what I picked up.
It's almost like she knows that they're not really threats. That's weird.
Oh,
she's on Crowder talking about it instead of on the phone
weird.
with the cops. That's
Okay, well, here's the thing. At least in my experience, I guess there could be a rictus of discomfort when somebody's describing a form of victimhood that they actually relate to. But grinning like, or that small quirk is, I don't know. I've seen it too often to think of it as being just a coincidence now. And I think it's from that when you're describing your victimhood, I think contempt is the last thing on your mind. And that expression, that asymmetrical grin, is contempt. People do that when they feel like they have moral superiority over someone, and they also are in a superior position. So you feel contempt for those you not only are inferior to you in terms of status, but also you consider to be morally inferior. So it's a weird sort of expression to make when you're describing a victimhood that you actually relate to. But so I'm just going to put that out there, and then let's continue.
All right.
So I think that hold on, let me center myself now. We talked about rape threats, right? I got a lot of rape threats.
That's an odd sequence. Let me center myself.
Rape.
Whoa.
Let's jump right to rape. I know. Well, that's what's on my notes. I have notes.
I appreciate that you didn't get offended at that. That was a joke. So I appreciate that we're able to have conversations. Go ahead. Any notes you have, and I hope.
Any notes I have. So you talk about violent threats. Do you get rape threats? I'm really curious to hear if you get rape threats.
Particularly from Muslims.
Really?
Yeah, thousands per day.
Really?
Yeah,
thousands per day. Actually
Crowder's got a huge platform, and he criticizes Islam openly, so he gets lots and lots of threats. But he doesn't make a big deal out of it. But yeah, he does get threats.
All right, so this is basically an observation of a demographic that is actually threatening him. I'm actually not really that surprised, and to be honest, considering what I remember from Muslim cultures, and I'm not saying that all Muslim men would rape someone or all Muslim women would, but it's more of a credible threat, I think.
Yeah.
They would find Crowder attractive, and they.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It speaks to their taste, of course, because he's an attractive man. But it's. I would say that is probably a credible threat, because there is a significant threat when you are dealing with tribal cultures like you find in the Middle East that don't have maybe our perception of sexuality. It's a very modern perception of sexuality. Raping a man is another way of subjugating him militarily. And this occurs, Africa, Asia, Middle East. It occurred in our cultures, I guess, prior to the Roman Empire, and our taming, because we used to be barbarians. Us Northern Europeans used to be pretty barbarous too. Our taming by the Hispanics, the Latinos, 2,000 years ago. So it was part of our culture then too. So it was this idea that you take everything away from a man and use his body in whatever way you want. And so I think that that's a credible threat. I don't know if he gets threats from women.
He doesn't specify.
Yeah.
He just says
okay,
Muslims.
continue.
Okay. Well, that was actually one of the bits that I thought was good to point out, because she worked under the assumption that he doesn't get sexual threats, and he says, "Oh yeah, sure I do." So I thought that was good.
It's actually really good. Like a bravo, Crowder. Like he's admitting that. It's difficult for men to admit things like that. Don't move it. I want to see what her response was.
Oh, you want me to go back to shit?
Yeah, I want to see what her response is. Like, he's saying, bald face, yeah, I also experienced that victimhood. What is her response?
Okay.
Per day.
Thousands per day, from Muslims particularly.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, you are someone, I don't know many men who get rape threats. Right, and to me, rape threats.
Okay, so she's just dismissing it. It's just like, yeah, whatever. You're just a counter data point to my theory.
That's just some crazy anomaly. It just doesn't happen.
She doesn't expect. Does she expect that him to give her sympathy for the rape threats that she receives? Let's continue.
Yeah, of course she wants sympathy for that.
Oz.
So she
what?
No, it's just really aggravating.
I think,
like, no.
To be honest, I think she's actually flirting with him in this. To be honest, I do. I think that her constant adjusting of herself. I think that there's something going on there. But Crowder's married, and he's so traditional. He would not look at another woman. especially not a woman like this. But anyway.
No.
One episode.
No.
He's talking about prison. So because they one of the clips that I skipped over was they were talking about rape culture or sexual assault, and Crowder was talking about how men, this was another MRA talking point, he says men experience sexual assault on the same level, if not more, than women, and then he uses the prison system as an example. And she basically tries to say that...
Why are we skipping this? Let's just listen to it.
All right.
Shawshank. Green Mile.
Okay, but go back
pick.
because we're missing her response to. So she just dismisses the fact that he says start where he says I get thousands a day, then go. All right, let's go.
All right. 36:53.
I appreciate that you didn't get offended at that. That was a joke. So I appreciate that we're able to have conversations. Go ahead. Any notes you have, and I hope.
Any notes I have. So you talk
Angling
about
for victimhood.
Violent threats.
Mm-hmm.
She's angling for a superior position through victimhood. That's what she's doing right now. So she's trying to find an angle to assert her victimhood over him.
Yeah, I get more rape threats than you. And he's like, no, I get lots of them too.
And the funny thing is that she's just completely dismissing things like, yeah, I get lots of rape threats. Oh, well, you're just most men don't, so I can dismiss you. And all this is she's trying to get an angle. She's trying to work an angle to find dominance over him, but through victimhood. So let's continue.
Okay.
I'm really curious to hear if you get rape threats.
Particularly from Muslims.
Really?
Yeah, thousands per day.
Thousands per day from Muslims particularly?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, you are someone, I don't know many men who get rape threats.
Have you asked?
To me, rape threats
You ever watched Oz?
No.
One episode.
No.
Shawshank. Green Mile. Take your pick.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about like the prison system, which is a completely different conversation. So
here's a question: how many women get rape threats as part of the system? Like the expectation that if you defy the system, you should be punished with this, like from people like police or prosecutors, because men do. You know, you are going to be jailed, and part of the punishment is going to be being raped. And this is a perfectly acceptable rape threat. It's not something that we look at and say, oh, that shouldn't be, you shouldn't do that. You see that on TV all the time. Does this rape threat not count? I mean,
yeah, no, prison doesn't count because it would change the numbers. And the thing is too about prison is, you know, why do so many people think it's not important? It's as though they think that men in prison deserve to be raped. Getting raped in prison is not part of the punishment of going to prison. How many men are in prison because they didn't make their alimony or child support payments? Do those guys deserve to be raped? How many men are in prison?
Or marijuana.
Yeah, or just for carrying marijuana on them, or some like minor violations that in that particular state happen to result in prison time. Do those guys deserve rape for that? It's not just murderers, rapists, and psychos in prison. They're actually a very, very small minority of people in prison. So
all right,
why doesn't this matter? How many prisoners are actually getting raped by the guards? How many people, how about the boys in juvenile delinquent facilities are getting raped by the guards who are female?
Mostly it's female guards raping male inmates, both adult and juvenile, or sexually abusing them. And it really is sexual abuse. It doesn't matter how you cut it. If somebody has the ability to decide, you know, if you get proper health care, Medicare, if you get your full rations of food, if you have access to a lavatory, whether or not you're going to be in solitary confinement, a person has that much control over your life, there's no way you can legitimately consent to them. This isn't a situation where, oh, if he's a big YouTuber, all of his subscribers made it so that I couldn't really consent to him. No, that's bullshit. This isn't bullshit. When somebody has that much control over your life, you cannot give legitimate consent to their sexual advances. So these women are sexually exploiting these men and boys in detention facilities. And I'm gonna let's continue.
Okay. All right. I got another super chat. Zeranx gives us $5 and says more men are raped in the armed forces than women as well. Even Jank Uger was surprised at that. Well, yeah, I mean, they wouldn't like that. Okay, so moving on.
I think a man is saying this colloquialism now where a man calls a man bitch. That's asserting sexual dominance over another male. That's referring to a male as a female dog. So my point is, these same kind of derogatory terms, and yes, death threats, rape threats, men get them all the time. As a matter of fact, you do sexual. Now I will concede this: women are more likely to get sexually themed threats online, and men are much more likely to get violent threats online. So probably just because they're looking at what gets under your skin. When an angry online jihadi says that he's going to rape me, I get a chuckle. I make sure he's not doxing me, and then I move along, down the trail. I know that upsets women more. So these are online trolls.
Yeah, and it upsets women more because it is a legitimate violent threat towards
What?
It's some.
Hold on, a little bit more.
Okay, you lost that point. Okay, sorry, Crowder. I think that you were good up to that point, but the fact is that this is not your usual way that you probably conduct yourself. She's going to use that opening and she's going to pile drive you. And this is my prediction. I don't know if it's true, but you just gave her an opening. You essentially laughed something off, and it doesn't, like, even if you just don't downplay it, just put it out there and don't back off from it. So this is what happened to me. Yeah. And you can't actually say, well, I didn't find it very threatening. Just sort of avoid downplaying it, because you give women like this openings and she's going to take it. So let's see what she does. Okay.
Well, so you're talking, if you remove the prison system, because that is a culture that is not representative of the culture at large. It is a very specific.
It's representative of matriarchy, I'll tell you that, because men are far more likely to be incarcerated and for longer times for the same crimes as women. So I think it's pivotal that we touch on that at some point in this conversation.
We should touch on that at some.
That's good. He rejoined with another presentation of a woman's power point. Like, this is empowerment. Women have a benefit when it comes to the prison system. Let's see where she continues with it. So,
okay.
Point. But what I'm saying is that if you remove that, women are more likely to experience sexual violence than men. Okay. Can you concede that point to me? If we remove prisons,
if you remove prisons, sure.
Yes.
I don't think you should, because I think
okay. No.
Well, no, but he says I don't think you should. But
no. But you don't concede that point because it's not accurate. It is not accurate. We don't know if men experience less sexual violence than women. We don't know. The very honest statement is we don't know. It's looking like men do. We won't know for a while. We need to collect some more statistics, and we need to be very careful about the statistics we are collecting because they undercount male. There's an incredible privilege that women have, that their sexual assault is taken seriously. It's not so for men. Men's sexual assault is not taken seriously. So there's a huge tendency for a culture to undercount male victims of sexual assault because of that privilege that women have. And because of that privilege, we don't know. We honestly don't know if it is true that women experience more sexual assault, or if they're just counted more, if we just care more.
Well, we only recently changed the definition of rape here to include men, like, what, 5 years ago? It's like 5 years ago.
Okay, so she's finding more openings and she's using them. Let's see what happens.
All right.
The prison system, for example, and I think I've heard you discuss this point or tweet about it, that black men are 5 times as likely to be incarcerated.
Yes.
Now,
100%.
Again, this is like
terrible thing.
Well, it's like the pay gap stat, right? So you use that, but you don't account for black men are that amount more likely to commit crimes than men. Now, that being said, let's go the other way. Men are more likely to get longer sentences and more likely to be punished and sent to prison for the exact same crime as women.
Yes, and that is an issue. That's a huge issue.
Then why would we exclude it from the sexual assault conversation? This is an example of a systemic advantage.
I'm trying to explain why, like, women get rape threats from men more than we get rape threats from other women, okay? Men get rape threats.
Actually, the most violent institutions are female ones. Men are less likely to be raped by other inmates, than women are to be raped by other female inmates. This is a statistic that nobody knows about. Mm-hmm. Very few people know about it.
Yeah,
so
because we don't count it.
I don't know if that happens in the outside world, but I just wanted to put that out there. So that it's not insignificant, the amount of sexual violence of women against women. Mm-hmm. I don't know where she's going with this, though. So let's find out.
Raped more by
Well, I know where she's going with this.
Men than they are by women. I'm talking about the way that men and women interact with one another here, right? So when we're talking about privilege and we're talking about all this stuff, women are more likely to experience sexual assault from men than
I'm trying to frame this in such a way
women.
that I win, is what she's saying. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to narrow the scope and narrow the scope to find a form of victimhood that I can then use to assert my dominance over you. That's what she's doing.
Yep.
Let's see if she does it. Let's see if she's successful.
Okay. And that, you're describing some of the workings of a patriarchy there, because for a long time, men had dominion over over women's bodies. Marital rape wasn't something that was illegal in this country until 1993. It was not legal.
It was not illegal for women to rape their husbands. You see where she's going now?
Yeah. She's
shifting. She's shifting everything, and she's grinning. She's like, yeah, man, I'm giving this fuckhead an arm bar. Look at him. He's I'm getting it. I'm moving it in, and I'm getting it. I'm putting it on. Crowder, you're going to be tapping out to me soon. That's what she's grinning about, because she's maneuvering the situations strategically so that she is in the position of dominance and then gets him to tap out. And the tap out in this is he concedes her right to judge his identity. This is the fight we're watching. And she is moving into position to take his arm. Let's see if she gets it.
Okay.
Today, there are still some states where marital rape is not tried the same way as regular rape.
Well,
and it just shows that...
And it's terrible. Listen, you shouldn't rape someone even if she said I do, okay? We both agree on that. I'm certainly not a rape apologist. But again, you're cherry-picking data, and you do this a lot. You're not acknowledging that men were also publicly humiliated, flogged, beaten, dragged through the streets if they so much as laid a hand on their wife. Never so if a wife takes a swat at a husband. So when we're talking societally, there have been different standards applied, of course, to both men and women. But both enjoy different advantages and disadvantages. I'm certainly not saying this as an example of today, the society at large favoring men.
Oh, she's not liking this. Look at the facial expressions.
Yeah. I like that he brought up the fact that, men were flogged and dragged to the streets and, put on the donkey backwards and all that kind of stuff. Good
concrete language from Crowder's. Excellent. Like, he's defending that armbar. She's trying to get it on him, but he's actually doing a really good job of defense. I don't think his entire repertoire is complete. Like, I don't think he knows everything that he can use as a defense, and he's obviously not comfortable with really going on the attack, because there are positions here, there's points here where he could have really nailed her, and he doesn't seem to be completely comfortable with his vulnerability and with the statistics and the arguments that he can do to really pin her to the mat. But he is defending the armbar pretty well. Let's see if he gets out of it completely.
Okay.
Really would say in 2018, it's the opposite. If you and I, for example, go into the field of science and technology, okay? If you and I have the exact same scores, if you and I went to the exact same school, if you and I are just as qualified, you're getting the spot, not me.
Are you sure of that?
Statistically,
yes. Are
yes.
you 100% sure of that? Statistically, yes.
The statistical likelihood, yes.
Okay, and okay, good. Good body posture. He's keeping himself held up away from her. And incidentally, I don't think she's flirting with him, Brian. If she is flirting with him, it's an attempt to get him off guard.
Yeah. She might be just like enhancing her feminine traits to throw him off. That's entirely possible.
If you see the wiggling of her head and the movements like that, she's not a happy camper right now. She is really trying. And he's like, I think he's pretty much gotten out of that position that she put him in. She almost got him. But he's doing a really good job of reframing it in terms of women's power. Like, right, he talked about the flogging. He talked about her having power in a scenario in which they're both going for a position as a job or in university. So he's doing a really good job, and she's responding in her facial expressions now are pretty angry, like a very controlled anger, but there is anger there. Let's continue.
Okay, well, I got some super chats. I don't want them to build up. So, Fretchinator2 gives us $2. All right, go to the bathroom. I'll read the super chats. Fretchinator2 gives us $2 and says, a feminist ideologue versus considerate. I'm assuming it's considerate, not considerate. Considerate Christian. Yes, Steven Crowder is definitely a very conservative, very Christian, very traditionalist man. So, I guess if any group was going to take on the MRA talking points and find them to be useful and even something that they actually care about, it's likely going to be people on the right before people on the left. Even though people on the left claim to be the ones that have all the empathy. But as you can see, by the way, I want to point this out. When Crowder tells her that he has received thousands of death threats from jihadis online, thousands of rape threats per day from people, and I believe that he receives a lot. I don't know if thousands, that sounds like a really high number, but I'm sure he gets a lot, and I bet he gets way more than she does, mainly because of what he does on his show, which is essentially piss off jihadis and feminists and leftists. She didn't actually have any empathy for that at all. Yet, earlier in the conversation, which is a clip I didn't show because we skipped ahead, she actually makes the claim that men don't have empathy for women, and that's why men have all the power and women don't. She says empathy is hard, is actually her line. She says empathy is hard, right? And it's funny because she claims that this is something that men should have, yet she doesn't have it for him. And it could be because he's like been dehumaned because A, he's male, B, he's right wing, C, he's Christian. And D, he actually like challenged feminists in public. Okay. Fretchinator2 says, is she giving Crowder the candlestick for $2? Thank you. Sholtheus Studios, I'm getting this right. I don't know if it's just her voice, but she sounds like she's on the verge of crying, like she's trying to appear as vulnerable at all times. He gives us $5. Well, yeah, I mean, that's possible. I don't know if that's purposeful or that's just the way she is. I think that maybe feminism is attractive to women who are scared of everything, and it helps explain that. And then Mephisto gives us $1.99 and says she leans in to listen with headphones. Wow, brains. Maybe that's just an involuntary thing that we do when we're listening. I don't know. Or she's adjusting herself in her chair.
Or it's a subtly threatening gesture.
Yeah, it could be that too.
Okay, let's continue.
Let us continue. I got to jump ahead to 4304. So just give me a second here.
I almost want to do a play-by-play. Of course, it's from this point onward. Well, I want to see.
I could do that. The thing is, she does a lot of and.
Yeah, but I want to see how he responds. Does he completely get up?
Let's keep going.
His posture is good. His attitude looks good. He looks like he's doing he did a good job. He didn't use all the defenses I would have, but he's doing a good job of staying out of getting into a position where she can pin him. So let's see what he does.
All right, let's just go.
Well, you can see that there are situations in which if a male and a female are up against the same job, the male will get... I think I sent you one of these studies. It was the study
You did. I remember it. If you don't have it in front of you, I remember it. It was a 2012 study.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a 2012 study about, I believe, in science and technology. And this was a very small sample size. About 100-something CVs were used. And these were only, and the problem with it, and this is something that feminists use a lot, kind of like the pay gap. They use a stat that they know really isn't accurate, and they know it's not something that would hold water when it comes to the court of arguments. So it's a very small sample size. The pay gap doesn't. Come on, you know that. So this was a very small sample study, 2012.
We know that it's not going to hold water is just insulting and is just
why
ridiculous.
It's consistent with the fact that your conjecture never held water and you still use it. Like, do you even know that you should possibly, like, if you're going to make a conjecture about reality, if you're going to present scientific theory about reality, it needs to have predictive value and it needs to be falsifiable? Do you even consider that when you talk about patriarchy conjecture? You don't. That's so the fact is that you do use science as emotionally convenient, because it isn't about it's not about having a shared reality. That's what logic and reason creates. It creates a reality that we share and we agree upon. It's like blockchain for reality. No, what you want is an emotional bludgeon so that you can insert your own personal reality as truth. And you're doing it right now. You're doing it right now. Every time you refer to patriarchy conjecture, something that has shown to have no predictive value. It has never been shown to predict anything. Something that has never been properly falsified. That means you've attempted to falsify it and found that your attempts failed. You have strenuously attempted to falsify it and found that your attempts have failed. Never. The fact that you present it like a fait accompli, that is indicative of how you use science. Not as it's intended to be used, but merely as a tool of convenience. Point for Crowder. Let's move on.
Okay.
Slightly so. I'll give you that. It was slightly insulting. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. It is. But statistically, it still is something.
Don't give her that.
Well,
it's true.
wait. Hold on. He does back that up. He does.
I'll give you that. It is. But statistically, it still is something that, put it this way, it is either startling that the feminist movement at large have never read from including female economists, or it's startling that they have and ignore it. It's one of the two. But the statistic is a statistic. It doesn't care about which group it's offending. It's just not accurate. Now, when it comes to this study, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was a 2012 study that used a very small sample size, and it looked at people specifically in entry-level jobs. Here's the thing. Feminists reached back to 2012 to take that study. But we have other studies, and we have meta-analyses. There was a 2015 study that looked at the same thing. I believe it used about 800-something applicants. And when it actually took into account people in different jobs, people, becoming tenured professors, the salary of a biology professor, it actually found that at higher levels of education, women in the STEM fields were much more likely to be accepted with the same parameters. This was a more comprehensive study. It included a larger sample size, and it's more recent. I don't know why all of the blogs and feminists on Twitter haven't been able to find a 2015 study.
Oh, you do.
But it's more valid and substantial. And I think
you do know why.
No, he does. I'm pretty sure he does. Yeah.
Okay, this you're right. This is actually sort of a little boring. This is just statistical stuff. Can we, because it's true.
All right, there's only 2 clips left. There's the rest of this one, and then there's the last one.
I'm sorry, guys. Since we're going into the statistical weeds, there isn't as much threat narrative posturing going on here. She just
although he did, like I said, she brought up a study. She claimed that he was being insulting. He said, "All right, I'll give you that. Maybe I was a little snarky when I said that. However, that doesn't make you right." Because she was trying to use the fact that she found something he said in tone to be insulting to try to frame herself in the victim position. And he said, all right, maybe the way I said it didn't come across is as correct. However, you're still wrong, and here's why. Either you're wrong and you didn't know, or your people are extremely manipulative and they knew and they said, no, we're not going to use that because it's not convenient for us. And she had to eat that. She had to. She didn't have a choice. And so I think that was a good one. In my opinion, I give point to Crowder, especially because he was able to recall this study from memory, which is kind of crazy. He must, like Karen can do that too. So, all right. So there's a few seconds left in this one, and then I'll go to the last one, and then we can wrap it up.
I'm sure you weren't aware of it. I certainly am not attributing to any kind of malice what I think can be attributed to not knowing.
She presents herself
as
as some sort of authority on gender, and she's not aware of current research. Look, this is retarded. Okay, let's skip to the next item.
All right, last item then. This is about 10 minutes later. So we'll just go to here. Now this is the bit that I took issue with. This is why I emailed Crowder.
And we can go into this if you really want to. I don't believe that there are many biological differences between men and women.
Really?
At all. Yes, I do. And we can discuss this if you would like to. I'm probably not the best person to discuss this because I was assigned female at birth. I identify as female. I'm cisgendered.
Oh shit, I'm too far back. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys. Let's go back a little bit.
Why would she be the last person to talk about it?
Well, that's how intersectional feminists work. If they're white, then they say, I'm the last person to talk about the experiences of black women. If they're black, but they're straight, they're the ones who they say, the last person that you could ask about. Because they want to give the floor to people of the... They think that only people who have the identity of the group that are being talked about have the authority to talk about that group. So that's just their own crazy little hierarchical system. So, all right. So here's the clip.
Here. And I mean, I would put forth these examples certainly in 2018. And I think if our goal is to help people, male or female, it would behoove us all to be honest. And I think that you have a lot of young men, and I think feminists don't really understand how out of touch they are with a lot of young men as well as young women. When you look at young men, they go, hold on a second, we make up 90-something% of workplace deaths. We're 3-something times more likely to commit suicide. We obviously are more likely to be sexually assaulted. We're five times more likely to be incarcerated. We're more likely to be incarcerated for the same crime. We are dominated by women at every aspect of education, from kindergarten through college, outside of SAT scores. They get more placement as a percentage of the population versus percentage of people in college and people who graduate. I think you see a lot of young men who are told that if you tell young men to check their privilege in an era where we both acknowledge that they enjoy no systemic advantages, and we know that societally they suffer from severe disadvantages, you'll see some very negative ramifications within a generation. And I would hate to see the pendulum swing so far the other way. Because listen, I'm more traditional. I know sometimes it offends feminists, but I'm married. I hold the door for my wife. I believe in chivalry. I really do believe in treating women respectfully. And I do see a lot of young sort of men's rights activists going so far the other way now, where they feel as though they've been so disrespected and their voices haven't been heard that they respond disrespectfully. And I don't think that's productive for anyone. And so
I'm stopping it there. That was the clip that made me ask him, what men's rights activists are you talking about? Now, the MRA talking points that he just brought up a whole litany of them. And that's information that he can attribute and thank MRAs for. However, my issue was he talks about the pendulum swinging the other way. That's not going to happen, I don't think. I don't see the pendulum swinging the other way. I don't see that happening. I don't think we would live in necessarily an androcentric culture, right? And in addition, I don't think that he's talking about MRAs when he says young MRA types, or he's conflating the frustration and the anger that some boys or young men who are interested in men's issues, the way that they express their frustration online is being sort of like conflated with disrespect for women, which I think is something that he has to, I don't know, compartmentalize or understand better. Like, I think that if a man is angry at a feminist, it doesn't mean that he has a problem with women. So, but that was the last clip.
What does he mean by the pendulum swinging too far? How does she respond to that?
Well, let me see.
I think truth is important in this discussion above all else.
All I want to say is that when people are talking...
These are like closing statements, so I don't know if she's going to respond to that.
Talking about privilege, we're not trying to say that people are actively acting in a way that, like, men are acting in a way
well,
that
that's even worse.
That they believe.
Because then you're talking about something that is extremely difficult to stop. You're not talking about behaviors. You're talking about people's essential being. Okay? If they're not actively doing it, they're just passive recipients of benefit from the system. They can never get rid of it or stop it. That actually makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, at some point you have to admit this has to be an action that men are taking. Men have to be choosing and taking action to benefit men over women. There's no way around it. This is ridiculous. This is woo. And I wish Crowder actually would talk to men's rights activists. You know, I mean, Karen's great, but she's more anti-feminist than she's a men's rights activist.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk to actual men's rights activists before you throw shade, Crowder? And I mean, you know, every movement has its extremists, but I think that the idea that there's going to be a pendulum swing back towards anything is unlikely.
Well, I tweeted at Crowder, and if you guys want to retweet my tweet, it's the last one I made on my Twitter. It's at ZANAMARU. I'd like to get on Crowder's show. I'm a fan of his show, to be honest, and I think he should talk to MRAs. Like when we had he had Karen on last, they talked about Islam, and I was watching it, and while I thought it was good, I was like, man, I wish Alison was on this show instead. Because Crowder would have, he would have gotten a lot more out of it. Let's put it that way.
You never know. Like,
I think, no. I don't know. I mean, well, maybe that, no, I don't think you're confusing to people. They just have to listen. I think Crowder's a good listener. I think.
Okay.
So.
All right, fair enough. Right. But I wasn't really talking about necessarily myself, but Paul, Elon.
Oh, yeah, get Paul on, sure, but I mean, like, why not you? Why not?
Well, I would do it.
If you're gonna talk to Jim tomorrow, why you certainly. I would say that being on Crowder is even more productive. Actually, far more productive because he has a million subscribers.
Well, I'm gonna go on Jim's show, and I'm gonna just be like, you know, whatever you want from this, you know, wherever you want to take this, I'm game. I'm gonna try to have fun with it. It's apparently I've been trying to have fun with it on Twitter. People have gotten a little upset with me on Twitter. I thought that I was clear that I was trying to have fun with it, but apparently it wasn't completely clear. Trying to do the whole blood sports thing, you know, like, you know, wrestling, the bants, the kind of thing. Apparently my bants come off as more like, oh, hello, fellow teenagers. Okay, all right. But anyway.
Well, yeah, so you better watch some WWE footage or something before you do that, because that's basically what it is. So, you know,
come up with
a character and, you know, maybe some theme music so that when you get in there, you know, it's like the John Cena theme or something. So, yeah, that's what I think you should do. You got to go in there like you're going to a wrestling match with just the same amount of drama and realism.
Yeah. That's what I'm planning. I'm just gonna be like, you know what, wherever you want to take it. Sorry, I didn't realize Tonka's show rather than Jim's show, but Jim is the one who supposedly, you know, like, rawr, we're going to be butting heads. So I've referred to Jim instead. Apologies, didn't mean to leave Tonka out.
It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good. But I'm going to just, let's do this thing. Yeah, if you enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, because we got a lot more of it, got lots more where this comes from, please go to www.feedthebadger.com and put some shekels in the hat. If you $5 will get you access to all of our after shows, which are lots more fun, a lot more silly place than the main shows. And $50 gets you access to most of the live after shows, so you can actually talk to us and talk with us in person, which some people really enjoy. And you can also find out way more on feedthebadger.com. Please do support us, because we exist because you people have supported us in the past. So we should thank those people too.
Last couple things. Can I tweet this at Crowder?
This video? Okay. For what it's worth.
For what it's well, maybe he'll want to watch it. Maybe he'll be interested. I don't know. He works like 16 hours a day. Maybe he doesn't have time, but And also, I got like a couple final super chats I really don't want to ignore. So,
no, go ahead.
Zeranx gives us $5 and says, "Screen cap her face at 43.58. That's the look of I have nothing to beat you here. I have nothing to beat you here." 43.58. Let me just see what that looks like. 43.58. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, that is pretty good. Is Crowder saying
that's not a happy camper?
Yeah, is Crowder saying don't jump? And then TK Mao gives us $2 and says, "So you hate me for who I am? Great, 100% better."
What?
I don't know.
Oh right. Oh yeah. I think it was in reference to my whole conversation about male privilege not being an action. I mean, at some point you're going to have to admit that it is an action. Rather, it is an inherent state of being. Like, seriously, if somebody is going to come up to you and say you're bad, and you say, well, okay, how do I stop being bad? And they're like, well, you can't, because it's not really something you're doing. It's something you're passively receiving from other men. It's like, what? Just tell them to go screw themselves. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Everything should be about behaviors. If you engage in behaviors that are negative, you should change those behaviors. If they cannot pinpoint the behaviors that you're engaging in that are negative, just be like, you know what? I reject your original sin by virtue of my genetic makeup. Thank you. Please go now. Bye. All right.